And welcome to the CEO briefing. Once again, it's the 2nd of May. Water the Blue Gold, Thursday, May 2nd, 2024, briefing number 260. Save the planet, recycle water. Why do you want to say that? Because if you don't treat your own water, you can't recycle it. All right. As usual, the safe harbor statement and disclaimer, etc. Regulation A, as you know, we are testing the waters, and that is ongoing right now, but we're about to file the Regulation A, Form 1A very soon. We're just wrapping things up. Okay, let's quickly take it from my X account. Here we go. This is a map of Latin American seaports, and they are surging. Top 10 ports in the region. We have, of course, Brazil. We have Peru, Ecuador, etc., all the way up to Mexico, and then we have Freeport in the Bahamas, etc. So now, why we mention this? Because as industry returns to North America, and there's a strong direction with that, and I think also Latin America, the new factories will be the state of the art. They won't require a lot of people. They'll be AI, automated, etc. And guess what? They will have their own water management. So this is a tremendously bullish thing for local management of water. All right, and then let's take a look here. Funded entitlements, look at this in Europe. That's the light blue. The dark blue is unfunded. Basically, so these are different. ES is Spain, so Netherlands is NL. Netherlands has done the best job, etc. So DE is Denmark, FI is Finland, LT is Lithuania. I could work my way through them, but as you can see, they're all way, way underfunded. It's basically unfixable. And here's the problem. As the communist saying used to say, you pretend to pay me, I pretend to work. In other words, the producers that have to make it happen eventually don't produce anymore because they are basically, all their earnings are going away and they stop producing. And guess what? You run out of money. That's it. Timothy, good news. Thank God for you, Riggs. All right. Appreciate it. All right. So continuing here. This is a scary graph. The top 1% officially have more wealth than the entire middle class of America. And this is directly driven by the Federal Reserve, as it points out here. Now, people ask me, why do you talk about economics on your show, Riggs? Why do you talk about inflation? What's up with that? Well, it's very simple. Number one, the middle class is really suffering. And it is our task to give the middle class an investing opportunity that the big guys, for whatever reason, and I think that it's a blindness when it comes to water, that people just don't get water. We had a fund manager from our own backer, our own group that funded us. Years ago, he said, what's the big deal, Riggs? My faucet runs water and my toilet flushes. Why are you carrying on about this? And I'm like, oh my God, if our own backers don't get this, then what about the rest of the investing class? And so, people just aren't getting it, but you do. And you understand that water is becoming an investable asset, and it's early, and it hasn't been trashed by a lot of private equity funds, et cetera. It's, aside from one unicorn that came into being last year, May of last year, Gradient, it's the field is open. And by the way, the unicorn was not in water as a service. It was just decentralized water. The clients still paid for it. So the whole idea of investor-funded water systems, which I kind of like as a tagline, investor-funded water systems, is to give the middle class an opportunity to participate in what is rapidly becoming a major commodity. All right, so let's continue here. I've lost a cover here, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Oh my God, this is pretty horrendous. 43% of small businesses unable to fully pay their rent. This is scary stuff. Delinquencies, 52% became delinquent in restaurants. 60% of firms founded after the pandemic report they're earning less than a year ago. So the rent delinquency has been uptrending all through 2023, but now it's like jumped even higher. So what does this say? Well, again, this is why we've got to bring capital help. I was talking to someone who's in the real estate space in a podcast this afternoon, which you'll see in a couple of weeks. And I said, I told a story about this mobile home park. This is before we had water on demand really rolling. And this mobile home park, she had to give up half of her equity in the mobile home park in order to put in the water system and comply. And I asked this person who's in the real estate space, I said, so how many mobile home parks do you think can afford $1 million water bill, a water treatment system? And the answer is very few. In the case of this particular mobile home park, it was hard on her. And she ended up having to give away half of her equity, as I was saying. That just because she would have been closed otherwise, so it was better 50% of something rather than 100% of nothing, right? So that's what's going on. This is why it's essential that we go capital free on these water systems, because capital is a real problem for the small and middle size sites that we specialize in. And by the way, we do large systems, but they are custom, so they're not going to ramp up as much, right? The ones that we do that are pre-pack tend to be small to middle. All right, I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin because who the heck knows what's going on? Crypto, whatever. Okay, let's take a look here. People are stuck in their home. Pick the color that describes people you know. Let's try green. This person has a $500,000 mortgage at 3% and pays $21.08. Guess what? You're not going to move, right? Why? To keep the payment at $2,100, the lender will only lend $300,000. Simple as that. So for an $800,000 loan, payments would increase by about $1,200. Basically, what it says is that it's very hard to move. Well, it's not only hard to move, it's hard to sell, right? Because mortgages typically are not transferable. It should be, but the mortgage industry is not going to go for that. Okay, let's talk about this. This looks interesting. Let's see what this is about. It's very feasible to do your own water treatment. Now, who is doing it? It's starting with people who have to do it, the people who are being fined for not having water treatment, the people who are being, like many breweries. There was a case study in the East Bay where a brewery was making too much effluent and the city just wouldn't take it. And they had to constantly truck their effluent to another county. Well, that's stupid, right? So these people are the first wave, the people who have to have it. The next wave is the people for whom it sounds like a good idea, but they don't want to put up $500,000. And for them, we have this new thing called water as a service, which is the next wave. Boom, just like that. All right. Multis are in trouble. The multifamily homes right here, 30% loss in value, 100% loss in equity, as the price was lower than the value of the debt assumed. Ouch, that is tough. Now, the big funds are going to survive this. The small people, not so much. And remember, multifamily, there's a lot of small people in it. All right, here, Ken was on a webinar. I'm going to be playing some of that for you tonight. It's very, very cool. We'll take a look at that. The amazing Hervoye Morik, who's got a great show. He stopped doing his TNT show, but he's on Geopolitics and Empire on Telegram and also on YouTube, I believe. So what do we got to say here?
Is there anything when it comes to tech, anything interesting related to water?
Here's the problem with water is that there's a tremendous number of technologies that go unfunded. For example, I know a really fine nanoceramic technology company that we've used their tech, and they should be highly adopted. But the problem is the water industry does not adopt technology well. And so I think that our mission really should be to help this along and to give these really interesting technologies a way to find a market, because the innovation isn't lacking, but the enthusiasm for it is. Oh, innovation isn't lacking, but the enthusiasm for it is. And this is why we got out of the core technology business. The veterans among you will remember how we had a pure technology play. Our model was licensing, and we found out that it's not going to happen in less than 12 or 15 years. And that just wasn't, in our timeline. So we moved more to a business model. Still some IP, intellectual property, but it was more of a business approach, and that has worked well for you, as you know. All right. Now, Larry Summers, and you know who Larry Summers was. He was in charge of finance during the Great Recession. And he's saying that it actually was 18% using the formula that was before it was changed, right? And we pointed this out. Long ago, we had one of those upward graphs showing that inflation was taking off, and sure enough, it is. But then again, of course, keeps being redefined. There's some sites that have this information, and it shows that if you use the right definition, it's true that inflation is around 18%. Okay. Now, here's an interesting one. It was just 7 hours ago. How can we close this gap? Americans say they need about 1.43 million to retire comfortably, and yet they only have retirement savings of 87,000. So at this point, if you are being told, well, just do a conservative thing, made 8% a year, et cetera, number one, you won't keep up with inflation. And number two, you won't make enough to get to that anywhere near that 1.43. You've got to take at least some of your wealth and put it in something that will grow fast. Okay. Take a look at this one. In this brave new world that we're creating, where it's more self-reliance, it's more about 19th century West new world kind of approach, maybe we can get less of this conservatism happening and more adoption. My belief is, I can't tell you how many people say, oh, I heard the city of Miami has a real problem with blah, blah. You could call them up and help them. And I go, oh, thank you. Because nothing's going to happen. Nothing. So why would I exert all that effort and my investors' money? No. Instead, we do the end run. And I find that so exciting. And it makes me realize there's so much innovation going on and so much individual initiative happening and so many voices. And this is a great time, despite all the weird stuff happening. I have high hopes, and water is where it's happening. Right. Now, this is interesting. Look at the U.S. economy's share of the world GDP. It is growing fast. Now, we are in trouble as an economy. There's no question about it. But at the same time, we're still not as bad as the rest. That's the horrible part. And this is where I'm saying that the regionalization of all over the world is going to result in a very strong boom in North America, because we have self-sufficiency of resources. And you may or may not like immigration the way it is, but at least it makes our population grow. And I love, Larry Fink of Blackstone was quoted. I didn't post it here, but it was ridiculous. He says, countries with declining populations will be able to adopt AI and robotics and automation faster. Yeah, okay. But who will be there to consume it, Larry? It won't be the robots. So what's up with that? I think the logic of reducing population just doesn't work. We have to confront the issues and just not say have fewer people, so therefore you can have a lot of robots. No, have robots, whatever you want to do, but solve the problem of employing people. The water industry has 7 million open positions, as of 4 years ago at least. And it's called the silver tsunami. People are retiring. There's lots of jobs available. And in the water industry, it won't be replaced by AI, right? Okay, let's take a look. Oh, this is very handy, because this is a map showing, if you look at, so the orange is out migration and the blue is in migration. Now, we've known about this trend for a long time, but what it means is that there's migration into areas that we're not accustomed. Take a look, for example, in Montana. There's a tremendous amount of migration into areas that have very poor infrastructure for water treatment. And so that creates a problem. And that's what's going on. And that's why it's so important to do decentralization, because the small water utilities just aren't keeping up. Okay, so that is the story for the Twitter account. I'm going to play 2 clips, and you'll see where I'm going with this.
You can lose when you compete. You want to go to a place where there is no competition, where you're the only one. Even when I was thinking about writing my book, Perennial Seller, my publisher came to me. I had this successful book marketing company. They wanted me to write a book about how to market books. As I sat down to write this idea of book about book promotion, I looked out at the space, and there were a lot of books in this space. Most of them weren't very good, but they were there first, and they'd been around for a while. And I said, I don't want to compete with those people at all. Actually, one of the great marketing books of all time is this book, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. It says the law of leadership, it's better to be first than it is to be better. And then it says, if you can't be first, invent a category in which you are first. Find a way to do it differently. So I think about when I'm starting a project, I go, has anyone done this before? And if they have, how can I do it in a new way, a way that stands?
So that's that story. Now so this is from a book by Peter Thiel called, well, you'll see in a second, that, you want to avoid competition. You want to be in a space where you are the first. And this is what we've done. Let's take a look at what Peter has. So this gentleman here is commenting. His name is Ryan, I think. He's commenting on that same book. But let's take a look at the actual story from Peter Thiel.
The first theme is this idea that and I sort of frame it as and this is probably maybe the single overarching theme is that we think of capitalism and competition as synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms. I believe that a capitalist is someone who's in the business of accumulating capital. A world of perfect competition is a world where all the profits are competed away. So if you want to compete in a crazy way, you should open a restaurant. You will never make any money doing so. And at the other end of the spectrum, what I think everybody who is a founder or entrepreneur should aim to do is build a monopoly. And all the great companies that people have built are monopolies of one sort or another. And I sort of use Google as the extreme example on the other end, where it's an extremely capitalistic company. It makes enormous amounts of profits, and it's so capitalistic because it's had no competition since 2002, when it definitively distanced itself from Microsoft and Yahoo in the core search business. The opening line of Anna Karenina is that all happy families are alike, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own special way. And I think the opposite is true of business. I think in business, all happy companies are different because they figured out something unique to do, and all unhappy companies are alike because they fail to escape the essential sameness that is competition. The Wall Street Journal ran an excerpt in my book. The chapter was entitled "All Happy Companies Are Different." They sort of took the chapter and they retitled it "Competition is for Losers," which got a little bit more attention from people, but it sort of really gets at sort of the core of this, because we normally think that losers are people who don't compete intensely enough. The people who are the losers are the ones who fail to compete really hard, and it's sort of like you have sort of a educational testing model, a grading model, sort of an athletics framework or something like that. A loser is someone who's not very competitive. And so if you say competition for losers, that sort of really gets at the core of this difference. And I think this monopoly versus competition idea, there's sort of an intellectual reason people don't understand it. And it's very poorly understood, I think, even in Silicon Valley, because the people who have monopolies pretend not to have them, and the people who don't have monopolies pretend to have them. And so it gets kind of confusing. So if you, and the way you do this rhetorically is, if you have a monopoly and you don't want the government to look into it too much, you will say that you are in a much, much bigger business. So if you're Google, you will never say that you're a search engine. You will say you're a technology company, and technology is a vast, incredibly competitive space. And you're competing with Apple on iPhones, and you're competing with Microsoft on Word documents, and you're competing with Facebook on social, and with the Detroit car companies with your self-driving car. And there's just competition everywhere. And if you and on the other hand, if you're in a completely competitive business, let's say you're trying to open a restaurant in London, which is, if you decide to do that after this talk this evening, and you try to get investors for your restaurant in London, this will be hard to do, and they'll say, well, it's a bad business, no one makes money, everyone just loses money when they open restaurants. And you will say, well, this is totally different from any other restaurant. It will be the only British, Nepalese fusion cuisine within a 5-block radius of the LSE. And so you sort of tell an idiosyncratic fictional story where it's too small. And so because people are constantly telling these fictional stories that distort what's going on, there is this real failure to understand the centrality of this monopoly versus competition dichotomy. But I think it's not just an intellectual failure. I think it is also a sort of a psychological failure. And I think that there's something where we find competition strangely reassuring. We find it validating. When you compete for things, you think there are lots of people doing it, and there's sort of is this perception of safety in crowds. If a lot of people are trying to get something, it must be valuable, and therefore it. Whereas if nobody's trying to do something, that's already really, really uncomfortable. And I think this, the word ape already in the time of Shakespeare meant both primate and to imitate. And there is this rather disturbing aspect of human nature where people are ape-like, sheep-like, lemming-like, unbelievably herd-like. And we're sort of attracted to doing things that other people do. We're attracted to compete for all these, and compete the most intensely for things that often matter the least. And what competition does is it does make you better at whatever you are competing on. And I'll give the high school athletics. You're on like a swim team in high school, and you will focus on the other people on your swim team, and you will get to be a better swimmer. But it always comes at the price of losing sight of things that are perhaps more important or more valuable. I think that's always sort of this distortion. There's a classic Henry Kissinger line about his fellow professors at Harvard, where the battles are so intense in academia because the stakes are so small.
There we go. That's the excerpt that I wanted to play, and this is why we chose a space that was that little side door that turned out to be the big door, which was decentralized water. And then we did the logical thing and fixed the capital issue. And by doing so, we entered the larger space of water as a service, which is still not very populated. But more importantly, we differentiated ourselves, as you'll see shortly, in Ken's little speech, in a couple ways that are very significant. So we know that we are number one in investable water assets. That's where that's at. Okay. Jeremy Ryan Slate is my good friend, and he has a company called Command Your Brand. We've been with them, throughout, 4 years or whatever it's been. We're on our fourth contract. I'm not sure if they're full year contracts, but nonetheless, we've been with them and they book our podcasts. They've been very, very good with it. And Jeremy does these interviews of people he calls icons. I don't know if I want to be an icon, because that means you have to stand still and just not do anything because you're an icon. Nonetheless, that's his term, and here's an excerpt of our discussion.
Welcome back to the Command Your Brand Show. This is the latest in our series of icons. Icons are some of the individuals that we have worked with that they just create incredible effects with what they do in the podcasting world. And then the feedback we get about them is incredible. So I want to unpack who they are, what they think, what they're doing, so that you guys can apply some of these things and really create those impacts for yourself and your business, because we're all about helping you do that. Reminder, if you guys are brand new to this channel, to like this video, comment, and subscribe if you want to be out there and command your brand as well. So I want to welcome somebody who I absolutely love. He's one of my favorite people. His name is Riggs Eckelberry. He's with a company called OriginClear that is doing some incredible things in the world of water. So Riggs, thank you for hanging out with me today, sir.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm glad to know that I'm an icon. That's kind of cool.
Well, to me, I was looking, I'm like, what is different about these people? And I was like, they're icons, right? They're people that they're almost like a shining light to help others, right? Like it's the way I was trying to describe it. And I was trying to think of how to describe this to others is like, you see certain CEOs and founders and they build a good business and they've helped some people, but you see in these other people, this shift to like, do something really big for mankind and build a business. And you're one of those people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the honor.
So for people that may not know who you are and what you do, tell us a little about who you are and what you do, Riggs.
Sure. Well, I'm my name is Riggs, and I came up through a very, very eclectic pathway. I started, I was brought up internationally. I got into the nonprofit space. I even became a ship captain in the South Pacific, carrying all kinds of exotic things, and then learned marketing. And in the 80s, I started a business in New York City, computerizing companies for the first time. That was a big learning experience because carrying a payroll of 12 people in Manhattan without any capital was really, really interesting. And it was also my first big learning experience, which I'll talk about later if it matters. But fast forward, I did more things to gain more experience after I gave away that business to my best salesman. He made a big success of it, and I got my learning experience. Did a lot of other things like direct marketing and so forth, and eventually landed in the .com, which was my space. The .com was just amazing. It was fast. It was crazy. Lots of transformation. Computers were no longer for computing. They were also for communication, right? Whole new world. And that really appealed to me. So I did well in that. I did even better after the year 2000 because that shook out all the dross, right? All the crappy companies got shaken out by year 2000. And after that, we did some really good work. Fast forward to about 2006, and I was taking a company public to the NASDAQ in the software space as the president and COO. And I'd kind of, so in 10 years, I'd gone from a product manager position, rolling out a Windows 95 product in 1995 to this number 2 role in a company going to the NASDAQ. And yet that wasn't good enough. I wanted to be a CEO. Like all number 2s, I thought I could be a better number 1. That is the curse of the number 2, right? And watch what you wish for. So in fact, I got to be a CEO, but it was in a brand new space, not software. It was this crazy space called algae for biofuels, and very promising. It remains promising, but it requires a very high price of crude. And it just wasn't there. So after a while, we realized that with the price of crude crashing because of fracking, algae was not realistic. And we did a pivot. We adapted and moved into water with the same technology. And that's where I learned that water is very change phobic. And it just doesn't want to change. Everything's fine. But it's actually, the more I learned about it, the more of a disaster things were in water. And as a result of the disaster, a trend towards decentralization, people doing their own water treatment, not relying on the utilities, which were generally failing. And so I became a real proselytizer for this new decentralized or distributed water treatment. In 2016, everybody thought I was nuts. Now it's a thing. But so we were early in the space. We started building companies that specialized in that. So we ended up with a combination of companies that we then monetized and have now put into a merger agreement for a company to acquire them to get on the NASDAQ. And that's what's going on right now. Meanwhile, my original company, OriginClear, continues its role as a funding accelerator. But we're really, really busy right now getting this wonderful company, which has very special usefulness and a good reason. It's a real transformation, getting on the NASDAQ. And when I say transformation, Jeremy, you were talking about people who have a higher mission. Well, Peter Thiel puts it very, very well. He says, look, you can do a 1+1 business, like yet another Amazon sales operation, and that's fine. You're not changing anything radically. You're expected to make money. It's not a big capital drain. But it's kind of like adds to the motion, right? Whereas he says there's a 0-1 business where there was nothing before and now there's something. And that requires capital, and it's, you have to sort of overcome all the inertia, and it becomes highly disruptive, but you can get into a big hockey stick and a giant win because of it and really change conditions. And that's what excited me about what we're doing.
So let me ask you this, because I think the thing I find very interesting about you, and just, it's also a lot of like who you are. But I guess when you look at it, you're innately an educator, I think, is a big part of what you're doing, but you educate in the way that, like, it seems like understanding for you is a huge part of what you're doing. Because I think when you look at some people, they educate in a way, but a way that overwhelms. You're good at educating in a way that's set for understanding. I guess, why have you focused so much on education in what you do?
Well, the problem is really, there's a great saying. My wife and I love Ted Lasso, and he said something. He said, "Be curious, not judgmental." Right? That's a very good saying, because it puts you in the right frame of mind for me to be interested in you, right? As opposed to being like Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. And especially these days, we have a phenomenon of a few people becoming insanely rich, and it's only going to get worse. We're getting into the space opera. I read a lot of science fiction, and you get these stories about advanced civilizations where a few people are galactically rich. Right? It just gets ridiculous because they get these enormous monopolies on all the metals in the asteroids or whatever, some crazy thing, and they become just gigantically wealthy, and that's where we're going. But but the rest of us are like, well, wait a minute, I'm part of this too, and so that's where we really got interested in the fate of the regular investor. And we're really dedicated to that. We're the only company in what is now called Water as a Service that caters to the regular investor, not the private equity fund, not some infrastructure fund, not the VCs, which they all got giant amounts of money. But what about the rest of us? And so that's become kind of our calling card, and we love it. We love relating to regular investors, is where it's at.
So for you, why podcasts? Why were you interested in having podcasts be a medium where you could do this education, you could have these conversations, and you could tell these stories?
Two reasons. Number one, of course, it gets you out there, 1,000 points of light. I'm a very strong believer in that. Show up in a lot of places. It doesn't matter if it's a small podcast, big podcast, just show up. And as part of that, repurposing it onto our own, I do a weekly CEO briefing. I'm up to 247 so far in the Zoom era. Before that, I was doing them as phone calls, but I've kind of done this a weekly thing forever, and I need content for that. So that's very important. The second part of it is I learn a lot. The questions podcasters ask are very useful. They're kind of like a survey says, because these podcasters are talking to a lot of people. And so they themselves are like, oh, yeah, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it makes me think, oh, yeah, that's a good angle. It makes us smarter. It gives us more of a multi-point kind of point of view. And that's, in my opinion, the real strength of communication, is when you're communicating from multiple points, not just one. I know that kind of sounds odd, but it's kind of like how the world is going multipolar, right? It's a similar thing. Things are becoming more fragmented, and as a result, you have to appeal to various different audiences in different ways and find the angle that works and so forth. And I have to say, also, they also want me to tell me about my failures, which I've had to do. Yeah. And it's not a common thing in PR to talk about your failures, but it forces you to talk about it, and it makes you, I think, more human, more real to people. And you kind of, you get a dose of humility. It's like, yeah, I wasn't always perfect, still not perfect. I always, Jeremy, I always think, wow, I was dumb 5 years ago. Well, I'll think, what about in 5 years? I'll think how dumb I was today.
I'm always looking at it like, man, I made that choice last week. I'm glad I made the one I made this week. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But there's two things you hit on there, which I think is really interesting. As I mentioned, like we've been doing these Icons interviews for a little bit. So I've had a few conversations before this one. You are the first one to bring up the idea of using it as a survey. That's really smart. I would have never thought of that. That's a really good point. That's actually something, as a guest, I'm gonna have to try and bring into my own kind of toolkit now when I approach podcasts. That wasn't something I was considering. And I guess the other part about it too is going through those failures. I think now, kind of in this age of like everything's perfect social media and things like that, like those failures also humanize you. And I think for brands having to connect right now, I think being human when everything's becoming less human, I think is actually more important than ever. Is that something you've considered?
Yeah, and it also, I think, if Taylor Swift had some faults that she talked about, she'd be more armored against all the damn criticism. I think she's wonderful. She's getting unjustified criticism, but it's in part because she comes across as perfect.
Yes.
Right? She's just wonderful. She's got an incredible boyfriend, and she's on the covers of all the checkout stand magazines. I'm like, oh, really? She makes muffins too? And it's just ridiculous, right? So it'd be nice if Taylor's PR people were to come up with, the biggest failure is when I was living in a car, right? It would really, really, really good. Mm-hmm. So that basically makes it hard to attack you when you're already saying, yeah, you know what? I can tell you some stories about how I screwed up. Lord, ran a ship on the rocks and somehow got it off. Let me tell you about that. After that, it's like, yeah, okay, so he's got this and that flaw, but he's willing to talk about it, right? And the truth is here's another big deal. A big piece of my operating philosophy is what I trademarked in the early 2000s as mistake-based marketing. Because here's what happened in the year 2000. Up to the year 2000, we were paying for surveys. We were doing research and paying Michael Bach at survey.com, $35,000, $40,000 per survey. And they'd go out there and they'd do these impression surveys and so forth and so on. That was great. Year 2000, all the budgets went away. No more money for surveys. And so we literally had to just throw things out in the market. So what I learned was throw things out in the market, but we willing to take them right back and fix them. And that became this iterative process that is actually, in my opinion, even better than, yes, please survey, but also use have this sort of contact, and you get better and you go, oh, wow. So that also applies to business failures, right? Mm-hmm. The things I've learned from having been a ship captain and contemplating, here I am, my stupid first mate, I was literally on the can while he put the ship on the rocks. But guess what? I was the captain. And I was sitting there in the middle of the night on a coral reef off the Papuan coast in Papua New Guinea, the Louisiade archipelago, and going, wow, by morning, we could all be rowing ashore in lifeboats, right? And like, oh my gosh. Well, we handled it. We took care of it. We got off. It was fine. It was all good. But the point is that, well, what the hell was I doing up on a coral reef in the first place, right? Like, gee, I mean, that's pretty wild. And I basically learned a lot of things about myself. So I believe that failure, properly processed rapidly enough, gets you to success.
Mm-hmm. So I guess when you're looking at like actually being on a show and having the conversation, I guess, what is your approach to the conversation? Like, I guess, how do you balance like what you're trying to get across with what the show is trying to get across? And like, what is your thought process around that?
Sure. Well, first of all, they all have a particular theme. I'm about to go on to a podcast in a little bit, which is what was my worst investment, right? Mm-hmm. So they have a particular angle. And so that's something you have to groove into. And you just, I think a lot of guests end up really boring. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be willing to just spice it up and come up with anecdotes and keep it lively, because at the end of the day, you're trying to keep that podcaster's popularity up, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to help them be successful. And so it's really a responsibility of mine to create a really good product for the podcaster that they will take away. And of course, it'll help me because I'll have more distribution out of it. So everybody wins. So you really got to think about, how is this thing going to relate to the audience? How is it exciting? How can I make it unusual, a breakout thing? Because then I can also take snippets from the podcast and we turn it into clips, and it turns into stuff that we use a lot that is sort of like, that's wild, right? So all in all, we're in a content game. And when we say content, we're really talking about stuff that turns heads, right? It's got to turn heads. It's got to stop people. Like, huh, what? That is vital. Because there's too much crap. Somehow Facebook has figured out that I like, steep skiing videos and dash cam crashes. And that's all it feeds me. Well, they've learned, right? Because that's how I behave. That's what I click on. So that is obviously those reel makers have done a great job of attracting my interest, and that's where it's at.
Well, I think my Instagram feed thinks I'm my wife because I'm often like seeing cool recipes and sending them to her because we're always trying to like make like interesting like homemade things. So I always get one, get the link and send it to her like, oh, look at this one. We should try this one. So my Instagram feed is literally just like homemade farm recipes. I think they've figured me out. But I guess looking at like podcasting, I think the thing a lot of people don't consider is really you have at least two publics, possibly more when you look at a podcast. You have the host that you're spending time with, and you also have the audience. And I guess for you, how have you dealt with like having two publics? Like how has that worked out for you in terms of like, have there been, ways you've tried to network or other opportunities you've tried to create, or what has that been like, collaborating with two publics, and how have you worked with that?
Well, think of the podcast host. Obviously, he has created that audience, that public that thinks a lot like him, because that's why they're with him, right? So it's not that big a problem because the host, in a way, is the icon for the audience, right? So if I interest him, I was on a podcast yesterday that was all about helping entrepreneurs succeed, right? Well, so he kept like trying to get lessons out of it. Oh, you see, Riggs is talking about vertical integration, and it's very important, right? And so he'd pull things out and distill them. And so that was his idea. That's why people were drawn to him, right? Was because they could get for free, they could get these nuggets. Well, it's my responsibility to deliver the nuggets, right? That's kind of my job, right? Now, should I be running a podcast? It's I've gone around and around many, many times. And the long and the short of it is that the once a week briefing keeps me busy. And the Substack that I really want to get around to doing more content in is the other one. And other people are going to have to be the podcast hosts. That's just how it is.
Fun and different, but the fun parts were the beginning where I talked about the business model. And then, of course, there was that cute little story about my experience in the middle of the night in an intimate relationship with a coral reef, which I was very lucky to get out of. So I'm not going to continue this particular video because it's more of the same, but you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and move on because there's some good stuff I want to cover before we get to the free stuff. May 2nd, we had an Earth05. I'm not actually sure what Earth05 means, but there was a webinar and Ken was a guest speaker. So let's take a look here. Convergence of finance and technology in the water sector. Explore innovative water fintech solutions that are paving the way for sustainable water management and access. And this is a short but interesting clip. Let's take a look.
Today, we will be diving deep into the convergence of finance and technology as it relates to the water and sanitation sector. This session, Navigating the Currents, we will be exploring innovative water fintech solutions that are paving the way for sustainable water management and access. So I'm pleased to moderate this session, and I'd like to start by welcoming our panelists. First, I'll start with Ken Berenger. Ken is the Executive Vice President of OriginClear and the co-creator of a breakthrough water asset investment program called Water on Demand. He has over 25 years experience in the banking, investment, consulting, Salesforce training, and corporate finance sectors. Ken, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks. We're pioneers in water decentralization. The way to go global is to go small, treat it at the point of use. So treating water at the point of pollution. We've built two companies to start, which build and sell very successful standardized systems in the industrial, agricultural, and commercial sectors, right? In other words, point of pollution, point of use. Very fast growing activity. We've decided That the way to accelerate this is with a fintech. And we created a third company called Water on Demand that we've now melded the three of them together. So what we've done is we've bundled them with, engineering and manufacturing. And right now we're in a registration to move that entity towards a NASDAQ listing. So Water on Demand, picture the three as one company. It's going to fund these systems, placing them on site where the end user simply signs a managed services contract, right? There's no capital outlay. I heard one of our speakers mention unbanked, okay? This is a great way, as we expand outside the United States, to simply place a system at the site. There's no capital outlay, there's no headaches, because it's all managed very much like any other utility, but this is a distributed utility network. So this is water as a service. Now, that's not unique. Water as a service is, usually very large scale operations. What is unique is that we went small to the kind of the smaller end user, and the source of capital, instead of being more the very large institutional type investors. What we've done is we're going to everyday, ordinary, accredited, and even non-accredited investors through some unique crowdfunding opportunities. So there's really, I don't know of any other company where in the water as a service space today that offers this to a regular investor to participate in that royalty payment, utility payment. And it's going to be very similar to a master limited partnership in energy. Now, what we intend to do is expand, expand this fintech to other regions, right, throughout the world, right? We're going to have partnerships and financial hubs. So there'll be New York, LA, Dubai, London, that sort of thing. And it can serve all over the world. The key to our fintech is that water as a service is far more profitable. It's money for money. It's far more profitable than ordinary kind of low margin water equipment. That's always been the bottleneck, is that folks couldn't make money doing these things, and it had to drag in public funding. And, that of course slows things down. So what we intend to do is expand this by letting local talent, local companies, local water experts do the installations, do the service and maintenance under our license. Okay. So ultimately, by multiplying identical water as water on demand fintechs in regions throughout the world, I think the potential exists to create a commoditization of clean water. We were talking about creating more clean water. We can commoditize that. And it could be traded across various continents, because every treated gallon will have a monetary value attached to it. So water's always been valuable, right? But there's never been a really good way of commoditizing it, in the sense that it's a raw material that can be traded internationally. We hope to start that trend. Now, it can be, and we want to use this platform of fintech. So I think that's kind of summarizing where our positioning is. We're very excited about it.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. That's a great starting point to hear your perspective in the conversation.
That's just a quick snippet, and I think Ken did an amazing job. He's very thoughtful about the topic, and he expresses our unique difference extremely well. Unique, valuable difference, because it doesn't mean anything if you're unique and it's not valuable, of course. All right, so let's keep on going here. By the way, there were mentions in the seminar about tap water, and you can always, to find out the contamination in your tap water, go to ewg.org/tapwater, put in your zip code, and you may be very, very interested to find out what you find out. Also, one of the panelists pointed out that there is a test kit you could get from TapScore that allows you to test your water at home. So just go to tapscore.com. All right. And with that, we've arrived at the freewheeling discussion.
No, I was really excited about Ken's webinar this morning. I got to listen to the whole second half and a good bit of the first half, and there's so many really interesting things to take away from two panelists that are from very different areas of the greater water family, and trying to do different things in these areas. But the fact that our solution that we've come up with was one, and again, I don't want to come off too grandiose, but we've created something that is actually real, right? That was the thing that stepped away, right? John is very much investing and wants to invest in these ideas around kind of conservancy and all these things. You guys should go watch the show, by the way. There's a link to it all over Ken's Twitter feed. And Laura is doing a really interesting thing in kind of underserved countries, but there's this concept of, okay, well, who's going to pay for it, right? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? And Ken's just sitting there going like, guys, you just let investors pay for it, right? You set up a system that allows investors to do it. You create the entrepreneurial solution. That's what we're already doing. And they're just kind of like, oh.
All right. So AJ was there and he saw them talking about biodiversity credits. And I just kept like shivering. I just I was just like, all right, guys. So no, they were talking about ideas like, how do you bring capital? And I said, just create an appetite. Allow people to actually make money. Okay. And who pays for it? If you break it, you bought it. If you polluted the water, you need to clean it. So here's the thing. They were talking about how these very ephemeral solutions that were probably a generation away. And I was saying, hello, no, we've got a very pragmatic, practical way. Everything. Here's the thing. I didn't want to dominate the show. It was an hour show and I spoke for about 40 minutes. I just kept muscling in there, right? And it's just like, no, wait a minute, right? But only because they kept talking about, well, gee, we don't know how, we'll pay. And I'm like, yes, we do, right? So I kept jumping in and just saying, no, listen, the ability to deploy this is now. I didn't want to, look, I wanted to be invited back because I think we need to learn how to speak to that audience that still has no idea, Riggs. They have no clue, right? They still think that this is a kind of a dream. They don't understand. So I thought if I was to me, I might not be. Asked back.
Next time, just pick a fight that makes for great clickbait.
It is great clickbait. And let me tell you something. There were a couple of moments there where I was just going, you know what? I'm going to pull the pin. And I just said, no, I put the pin back in. But so here's what's amazing. So we had these two people, totally different sides of the spectrum. One guy goes, yeah, I just invest. We're going to do credits, biodiversity credits, and they're going to work like carbon credits. But carbon credits don't work. They're a disaster. I'm like, okay, well, you sold me, right? And then the other one's talking about places in underserved, unbanked areas, and I went, actually, I'm the bridge between your two visions. I said that. I bridge what you two want to do. You're on both ends, on opposite sides of the spectrum. And I didn't want to come off as glib, but I'm like, duh, we've been talking about this for 2 years. So I was able to very lightly, I didn't go full me, right? But I was able to very lightly touch upon the fact that the solution to solve the most out of the way remote water problems exists. And they go, well, how will people in villages pay for it? I said, well, no, they won't. Like you talked about, we can deliver fresh, clean drinking water for free. But the guy upstream who's breaking it, he's going to pay for it. He's got to, right? Yeah. Now, he's selling a product. So here's the thing. If he's making tires or selling food or whatever the hell he's doing, growing food, whatever, there's a profit there. Now, if these distressed countries in Africa and things like that, if they have to raise the price of food slightly to make sure the people downstream don't die, they will do that.
But the cool part is that these are actually financially valuable contracts, right? The ability to recycle means their water rates go down. And also, most important is inflation is under control. If you have your own plant, then you are out of the inflation.
Control, right. Well, here's what, no, in the U.S., the model is already far more advanced. They're talking about, well, these people don't pay for water, okay? Neither do the people dumping the toxins upstream. I get that.
So there was
I addressed that. I said, okay, so you know what? There needs to be some responsibility in making sure that they pay so that people down. But my point is, you told me there's no solution, and I just gave you one.
This is very true in Mexico, for example. Right now, my good friend
who we know, is living in Puebla, and he's saying that his only customers, he's in water treatment, are the Anglo corporations that have Mexican subsidiaries.
Right.
All the Mexicans like, well, throw it in the river, right?
Good. Yeah, I know.
River looks like a rainbow. And so that is the problem. And there's an enforcement issue. And the state of Puebla, I think it's also a state. Yeah, it's a state. Is also, okay, well, why don't we just clean the river? Let's clean the river. They don't know how to do it. So they're just going to have a massive multi-billion-dollar project to clean the river, which is not going to get funded. So it comes back down, as you say, but here's what's going to happen. We're not going to touch we're not going to touch the Mexicans in Mexico for a while. We're going to do the new stuff. I've been talking about the reshoring that's going on, the Anglo factories that are coming to Mexico, and they will be compliant with water treatment from day one. Sure. They'll be built that way. It's just how it is.
Absolutely. And we'll have a built-in client base. And as they expand into places north in the continental United States, we'll already be an established partner with them, which, is basically is massive scaling. There's another thing that I would want to mention. They kept talking about, well, our idea is to use fintech and AI to calculate where water quality needs to be, to give it a simple number, and then we'll just restore a lake. And I said, yeah, but how do you do that? I said, we have the how. We've built these systems that I said, you can't just have, I used your line, you can't just have an anti-gravity chair and say, I've got the chair. So I made some friends today. It was great.
Well, again, the whole framing of the webinar, and there's a good comment we should get to. I don't want to, Stephen. We'll get to you in just 1 second here on that question. But the whole the whole point of the webinar was to talk about fintech and AI and the impact on the water industry. And one of the really neat angles that we talk about every so often on these on the briefings is the fact that the tech is there. Right. And it was even brought up by one of the other panelists. John's like, 10 years ago, you couldn't have done this because the technology didn't exist. And it's like, well, we now have, these contracts with Clear to be able to do this stuff. But the more interesting thing I was talking about with Ken earlier today is even in the most remote of places, you got one of these, right? They may not be able to afford clean drinking water, but somehow they got cell phones with internet, right? And so being able to have access to the internet via satellite or cell phone networks or whatever, even in very underdeveloped parts of the world, allows you to be able to use that kind of tech, to be able to use utility management services to allow for people to be able to pay for water and pay for services.
Put an app on a phone.
Exactly.
I want to say
Well, hold on. So from the technology part, that does enable, through the improvement of things like, satellite net and all this other kind of stuff, the ability to take this even into places that people aren't even thinking about yet because they're not processing, oh, well, there's no place for me to set up my, my big massive system and I can't serve all these little pockets of people in all these different places, but we can. We can.
Now, we went from, and it was funny because you saw the change, you saw the room change. These two panelists were kind of totally trying to fit, like, what do you mean you have a way of doing it, right? They went from that to, at the end, John, who's the finance guy, he was like doing big thumbs up into the screen for me. He was like, wow, yeah. And he was so in the span of a few minutes, and I really only had, 10 minutes of speech time or so, I was able to, without just making it the Ken Berenger show, I could have laid the whole thing out and it would have been far more comprehensive and they would have gotten much fit. But I had to do it in small bites because I wanted to be deferential to the other panelists. I don't know why, but I did.
And
I know. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Stephen, about your question.
Wait.
We're not going to.
Can I address? Let the CEO address it. I'm the C-level guy who has to go to Costa Rica in case the SEC comes down on us. So let me comment. All right. Now, Stephen, you know full well that we are not able to comment on the SPAC or where we are in the process or we project to be actively trading. You know this because otherwise, guess what? The merger would then be terminated and then we'd be in fine shape. But I can tell you this. We filed a 10K 2 weeks ago, an annual report, with subsequent events. Was there any mention of a problem? No, there was no mention of a problem with the SPAC. And we would have had any material event would have to be disclosed. So You know, it's you know what the dogs didn't bark. The dog didn't bark in the night. The Edgar Allan Poe story. You know, you knew that it was an inside job, the burglary, because the dog didn't bark in the night. If there's no barking going on, if there's no disclosure, that's your clue that there's nothing to disclose. All right. So
and what I was going to say is we can't discuss it. That's really in my defense. I was going to just say that let's not talk about it. But you actually described it more.
I'm trying to be helpful here,
right?
Because we stated in the original filing that we expected it to be done, in the June-July timeframe, whatever we said. So if it changes, we have to say so. Furthermore, there is a 10Q coming out. The deadline is 15 May, very soon, which is the first quarter, and then again, we'll be required to say what's up. So thank you very much, Stephen. I didn't mean to come down on you so hard, because he goes, no, I didn't know you were not allowed to say anything at all, but we're happy to know there are no problems. Thanks. Again, I'm not saying there are no problems. I'm telling you that if there were, we would disclose them, and I also cannot obviously make any material statements otherwise. So stay tuned. Feel free to wade through our annual reports, because it's so much fun. I should do a show that just goes through the annual report, and everyone will fall asleep.
I'm going to be off that night.
Anyway, no, but it's actually, we spent a lot of time on the annual report. There was a lot of staff work, meaning me and Prasad staff, writing. We wrote lots of stuff. It was very, very interesting, but nobody pays attention, of course. But I have to tell you this, when I have done market research, one of my sources has been the annual reports of companies, because they put in a lot of stats, and it's actually a great source of information. Now I just Google it, because Google sweeps it all and it's done. Anyway, we're going to have to wrap it up, because we're at 9:12 and we're so enthusiastic. I should have cut off the thing with Jeremy earlier, because I realized.
Ironically, you were talking about a 20-minute segment that put people to sleep. When you put the camera on, I was going to be like this. I'm sorry I fell asleep during that 20-minute segment. But I thought that might be too cute by half.
Yeah. Oh, you were going to actually, you were going to torpedo the thing.
Well, I was going to do. Oh, that last segment was so long. Okay.
No, you're so right. And in fact, that thing of doing short clips, we somehow drifted away from it. We're going to go back to it. Anyway, thank you all. It's been great. And we are going to have more. Oh, by the way, we got the LD Micro footage. And so the actual presentation we made on the 8th, I think it was 8th of April. And so was it the 9th? It was Tuesday the 9th, that's right. And we're going to go ahead and play that next week. So you'll see how wonderful we were, because we were. With that, everyone, thank you very much. Have a good evening, and stay cool as we get hotter and hotter here in Florida.
Good night.
Night, everybody.